The lemming, known as the little giant of the north, is a small Arctic-dwelling rodent characterized by their tendency to engage in massive, often forced migrations. Lemmings might be adorable, but don't be fooled. These feisty creatures are actually quite aggressive, often screaming, biting, and charging at predators much larger than themselves. Now, you might be sitting there wondering what lemmings have to do with autism. That, my friend, is an excellent question. Welcome back. To call someone a lemming means that they blindly follow the crowd, often into destructive or foolish situations without thinking for themselves. It's a metaphorical term based on the myth that lemmings commit mass suicide by jumping off cliffs. Very similar to the sheep analogy, but instead of a flock of sheep, picture a very angry hamster running off a cliff. So why do I even bring up this analogy? Well, it's because RFK talked about autism again, and once again, there seems to be a huge overreaction to his words. Not because he said anything particularly controversial, but because everyone seems to be falling off the proverbial cliff and falling for this curated narrative that is all over Instagram and TikTok. It seems we have slightly lost the art of critical thinking and examining things in full context. So in order to avoid becoming like our feisty little friend, the lemming, we're going to take an objective look at what exactly he said. Let's watch the clip.
In the old days, Medicaid paid for medical procedures. So if you got a hernia operation, we could figure that out at CMS. We could see you had a scar. It was done by a licensed doctor, by a licensed nurse, and we could track to make sure it actually happened. The waivers allow people, family members, who are taking care of an elderly parent to get paid for balancing the checkbook, for picking up the groceries, for driving somebody to a doctor's appointment. Today, the biggest job in New York, 650,000 people, the biggest employment niche is home care. These are family members who are getting paid to do things that they used to do as family members for free. And this is rife with fraud because we have no way at CMS to determine whether they actually perform that duty or not. We don't know whether you drove your grandmother to a doctor's office. So it's an opportunity for fraud, and the state corrupt people, fraudsters are taking that opportunity all over the country. And it's one of the reasons that Medicaid doubled during the Biden administration, because we are paying for fraud now as much as for medicine.
So here is the first thing that I noticed. He really did not say anything about autism and kids specifically. So the fact that so many people kind of listened to this clip and immediately jumped to the conclusion that he was talking about caregivers who are caring for minor children and targeting parents of disabled children specifically is a little bit strange. Using the context of this clip, he was specifically talking about adult children caring for aging parents. And this is something that, most likely everyone is going to be doing at some point in their lives. And he pointed this out specifically because it is really, really easy to commit fraud using the current system that is in place when it comes to caring for the elderly, especially in places like NYC, where there are really not a lot of checks and balances when it comes to this specific type of Medicaid waiver for caregiving. So first and foremost, he was not talking about the autism community specifically, which means that it is very probable what we are seeing right now and the outrage that's happening is a prime example of curated press. So the news and social media is kind of taking this blip out of context and turning a statement against fraud into we are taking away your rights as parents to be paid to care for your children. That's not at all what he is saying, I don't think, as far as I was able to tell from the videos that I've watched and from the actual full-length interview that he gave. My friend Sarah over at Inchstones kind of summarized this problem really well in a recent Substack of hers, which I will link the full thing down below for you to check out. But the quote that I love specifically was, quote, "The volume goes up almost immediately, every time RFK speaks about autism, Medicaid, disability, or adults with disability. And people stop responding to what was actually said, and they start reacting to the fear that was implied. These headlines sharpen, the commentary accelerates, and the disability community braces, while very quickly the conversation becomes less about policy and more about political identity, end quote. And this really hits the nail on the head here because we have such a distinct contrast between the words that he spoke and the story that people have very quickly bought into. We have kind of adapted this weird groupthink mindset on really both sides of the political spectrum. The side that agrees with RFK Jr. is kind of rushing to defend him without understanding the facts, and the side that disagrees with him is fanning the flames of fear and hatred, and the autism community has become trapped somewhere in the middle. We really do need to try to avoid falling into either one of these camps, if at all possible. And in order to do this, we really need to be able to look at this particular situation from a big picture view. So we're going to kind of zoom out. I don't believe that any politician deserves our blind loyalty or our blind opposition just because of the political party that they happen to fall into. And these past 4 years really should be a perfect example of this. The Democrats did a less than ideal job of running our country from 2020 to 2024, and the Republicans are also doing a less than ideal job running our country right now. And this is objective truth because we have all felt the impact of the decisions that these leaders have made day to day in our lives. And after the events of recent years, especially since COVID, I'm kind of the opinion that actions tend to speak louder than words at this point. And RFK Jr. has done a lot of things that the autism community agrees with and that I agree with, like giving parents and non-speakers a place on the IACC. That was a great decision. Or kind of removing the monetary incentive from doctors who are trying to push interventions on children. That was a really great decision. He has also done some things that I disagree with and that the autism community disagrees with, like calling ASD a horror show. It's a little bit of unnecessarily strong language. I really don't feel super strongly about him one way or another yet because I kind of want to wait to see how things are actually going to play out. We're all kind of watching to see if what he is saying is matching his actions. Is he listening to parents? Is he focusing on the needs of the most profoundly impacted population? Is he really going to do what he is telling us he's going to do? From a neutral stance, I think that is what he is trying to communicate, is that there is rampant fraud happening in our country right now. A mass majority of this fraud is taking place through the caregiving channels. So we have seen this come to light with the daycares, right, in Minnesota and the daycares in California and the fraud that has been exposed there. They are investigating, nursing homes and day habs and just normal caregivers and group homes and places like this. Anything that is a Medicaid-funded program. And these programs are incredibly vital to so many families, but they really are also the perfect breeding ground for a lot of intense monetary exploitation. And this is because we really don't have a consistent and reliable method of checks and balances in place right now. And we've got the proof that the disability community is losing billions and billions of dollars each year across the country to fraud. And it's this lack of checks and balances that is really hurting disabled people too. Because in many states, there is no consistent standard of care for people who have received a Medicaid waiver for caring for their loved ones. I mean, I know people personally whose families and friends made the decision to exploit their disability because of this, right? People who have received the funding for caregiving, but who were really just being exploited by abusive family members. So yes, fraud exists in the Medicaid caregiving space. Unfortunately, this is kind of an undeniable truth. But the flip side to this is that millions of people rely on these waivers to have independence and to live. Millions of families are not engaging in any type of fraud, and they're truly relying on this income and these waivers to be able to stay home with their disabled loved ones. And the idea that this might be taken away from them kind of ignites a primal fear and very understandable outrage. In my opinion, these families, they don't deserve to suffer for crimes that they didn't commit. And I think this is what they are afraid will happen if RFK Jr. begins to investigate the fraud that's taking place with Medicaid waivers. They're afraid that their own lives are going to get dissected. And this is an understandable fear. That is also objective truth. But here is the problem with this whole situation. We're kind of allowing ourselves to, like the lemmings, be completely overrun with an emotional response. And we really need to be making effort to kind of step back and ask one very careful, very specific question. Is it possible for our government on a national scale to actually catch funding abuses and fraud without creating more fear, scrutiny, paperwork, and humiliation for these vulnerable families? Yes, stopping fraud is crucial. But this is a process that really is going to have to be done with a extremely intentional microscopic laser, not like a pair of pruning shears, right? And I can't pretend to know how that's really going to work. And we don't have a whole lot of control over how the government is going to structure this vetting process and investigation in the event that they decide to move forward with investigating this fraud. So right now, the idea of exposing what's going on within these waivers, it's really not inherently a good or bad thing. It's too soon to tell, but it's never too soon to begin training ourselves to stop immediately buying into the narratives of our own unique echo chambers, right? As a society, we need to be able to think for ourselves and do our own research, especially when it comes to topics like this. So while the temptation might be to default into outrage and fear, we should really try instead to be motivated to investigate the truth for ourselves. Over the past 5 years, we have slid deeper and deeper and deeper into a pit of blind trust, driven heavily by social media. And it's really not enough to just say, hey, I'm going to adhere to my political side. I'm going to listen to this mainstream media outlet only. I am only going to hear from this independent journalist. That's really not good enough anymore. I think it's good motivation to re-engage in critical thinking and to kind of re-engage in doing our own research. And how do we start doing that? We start by questioning everything and by striving to seek truth. Because it's not about what RFK Jr. is saying, or CNN, or Fox, or the New York Times, or the ASAN. What really matters is that families living with disability, they really demand truth, and they demand authentic support. They really cannot afford political opportunism, or to be taken advantage of by fraud, or to be exploited by program reforms that, try to twist legitimate care into something worth scrutinizing. It's a really delicate conversation that can only be navigated by making a conscious choice to put aside your personal bias and political alignment in favor of the pursuit of truth. Because, yes, fraud exists, and yes, the needs for caregiver waivers are still astronomical. And yes, these families deserve better than what they are currently getting. These are the truths. The answer to what we do about these truths lies not in blind faith and falling for media news. The answer lies in the ability to engage in investigation and critical thinking and to kind of examine all angles. I've heard, conversations with different people, and I want to, actively try and figure out how can we work together to collectively address these problems. But, we can't do it alone. we're all going to have to work together and kind of be willing to have these conversations and to continue to investigate all angles. Noam Chomsky once said, "Every society is built on stories, and those who control the narrative control the people." It's up to us to make the choice to stop blindly trusting in narratives we're given. That's the only way that we're going to successfully create any positive change. And if we fail, if we keep allowing fear or blind trust to dictate our responses, things will likely not get better. So it's up to us to take a stand, to do our own research, and most importantly, continue having the hard and necessary conversations that will produce true change.